Hi, my name is Ileana, and I'm a librarian at the San Francisco Public Library, located on the unceded land of the Ramaytush Ohlone peoples. Wherever you're tuning in from, we're so happy to have you with us today. Welcome to another special Viva program. I am extremely excited to bring these wonderful authors into your screen tonight. A huge thanks to the Friends of the San Francisco Public Library for their generous support of this special series. We are humbled and proud to have Latinx authors Aida Salazar and Natalia Sylvester, members of the author collective Las Musas, as they share their latest and upcoming works, timely novels about a family caged in a detention camp by the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency to a presidential election for a Cuban-American political family. This conversation is just going to be amazing for older youth and adults alike. I have been looking forward to basking in the knowledge of these mighty women. Aida and Natalia are both members of the author collective Las Musas, and they'll be sharing their latest works, discussing Latinx cultural elements in their work and what inspires them. Las Musas Books is the first collective of women and non-binary identifying on the female spectrum, Latinx, middle grade, picture book, and young adult authors to come together in an effort to support and amplify each other's debut or sophomore novels in US children's literature. Aida is an award-winning author and arts activist whose writings for adults and children, explore issues of identity and social justice. She's the author of the critically acclaimed middle grade verse novel, The Moon Within, which is an International Latino Book Award winner and received recently an America's Honorable Mention. Also, the recently released Land of the Cranes and the bio picture book, Jovita Wore Pants, the story of a revolutionary fighter, which will be coming out soon. She's slated to co-edit a middle grade anthology on menstruation by writers of color titled Calling the Moon. She's a founding member of Las Musas, and she lives with her family of artists in a teal house in Oakland, California. Natalia Sylvester is the author of 2 novels for adults, Chasing the Sun and Everyone Knows You Go Home, which won an International Latino Book Award. Running, her debut novel for young adults, is a 2020 Junior Library Guild selection. She was born in Lima, Peru, and she grew up in Florida and Texas and received a BFA in creative writing from the University of Miami. I'm going to invite Aida to join me on screen to share a bit about Land of the Cranes and this hauntingly beautiful story. Aida? Welcome.
Hello, hello, everyone. Thank you so much to the San Francisco Public Library and the Friends of the San Francisco Public Library. Thank you, Ileana, and the entire staff for doing this, providing this incredible programming. And I just adore Viva. It's just so wonderful. So I'm in Oakland, and I live now on Ohlone land, and so I just wanted to say thank you to the First Nations that were here to caretake, and here we go. So I'm going to read a little bit about from Land of the Cranes. Land of the Cranes is right here, and it's a book that's very different from my first book. It is about this little girl, 9-year-old Betita, who believes that she's a bird because her father told her they follow a prophecy, an Aztec prophecy that says that all migrants should be free to fly as cranes. And unfortunately, her father gets deported. And her mother and she, when they go to meet him at Friendship Park, which is on the San Diego Tijuana border, they miss the exit and end up on the other side of the the border, and when they try to come back, they're put in an ICE detention center, processing facility along the border. And she writes picture poems to her dad about the incredible human rights violations that she experiences while she and her mother are caged. And these picture poems are like these, basically they're like little drawings that she makes, and then she adds poetry on the side. So this is Betita, and I'm going to read to you from the beginning of the book so that you get a little sense of her voice and why she does what she does. My papi says, long ago, our people came from a place called Aztlán, the land of the cranes, which is now known as the southwestern US. They left Aztlán to fulfill their prophecy to build a great city in the navel of the universe, a small mound in the middle of a lake where they saw an eagle devour a serpent on a cactus. They called that place Mexica Tenochtitlan. It was also prophesied our people would return to Aztlán to live among the cranes. So this next poem, it's a novel in verse, and I guess you can't really see that. There you go. It's a novel in verse, and so it's a story told in poems. And this is a poem that happens right after her father is deported. It's called Walls. On the bus, Mommy says, here in El Norte, there are walls we are not supposed to cross. We are sin papeles, undocumented. Her voice trembles. A word that means without permission. I remind Mommy that this is the land of the cranes. We have wings that can soar above walls. Sí, amor, but not when they have cages and can stop us from flying. She sweeps me into a one-handed hug and kisses the top of my head. I watch the traffic turn from smooth to crowded through the small window of the bus taking us home. And I'm going to read one more. This one's called Silver Capes, and this is the moment when they enter she and her mother, her pregnant mother, enter the detention center. We walk into the ice monster's maze, a chain link skirts, cages filled with cranes, more shades of tan and brown than I've ever seen, families captured, sad-faced, worried-faced, crying-faced, distant-faced, some lying down, some standing, arms crossed, others sitting. No longer wearing wings, but silver capes that crinkle, crackle each time they move or pull the capes closer to their bodies. Coughs, babies crying, people speaking quietly, all astir in my ears. The capes shuffling and sounding so loud inside and outside their murmurs. Is this where we are headed when Mommy and me are handed a folded cape each? Some of them see us, and I can tell they feel sorry for us. Some stare away from us, maybe wondering when they will be free. Others close their eyes and clench their fists like I sometimes do when wishing for a nightmare to be over. It's always hard to read from that book. Okay, well, now I'd like to bring Natalia into the room, into the virtual room, so that she can share with us from her fabulous book.
Hey, hello.
Hi.
Hello, thank you, Aida, first of all, for that reading. It's just so beautiful. The book, your book is just so, just really will always be in my heart. And I'm just so happy to be able to be in conversation with you tonight. And I'm really grateful also to the San Francisco Public Library for inviting me. So it's just a real honor to be here. So Running is my debut YA novel, and it's about a Cuban-American girl named Mari, whose father is running for president. And throughout the course of his campaign, she ends up learning a lot about not only him, like her own father, but about herself. And it's really about her journey to realizing that her own political views may not actually be aligned with his, and she has to decide what to do with it now that she's found her voice, now that she's stepping into her power, now that she's examining and questioning and unpacking her own privilege. What will she do with it? So I'm excited for this conversation, and I thought I would start by sharing a short reading that is a scene in which Mari first learns that her father's running for president. And it's this really tender memory that she has with her father, and it's he took her to the Everglades, and that was usually their like special place. Like she has a very close relationship with her father. She's always seen him as her hero, and even though that changes throughout the course of the book, there are still all these moments that she holds on to, and that in a lot of ways she pulls strength from. So I thought I would share one of those moments here tonight. So. He put his arm around me. The movement made the boat rock gently, like a cradle. I know I haven't always been a perfect father, but I'm trying, he said. In my own way, I'm trying to make this world a better place for you and Ricky. We took a deep breath in unison. The air smelled like a fish tank, like dampness stuck in the back of your throat. I've decided to run for president, Mari. Your mother and I have been exploring the possibilities, and it looks like I have a chance of winning. But I need to know you're okay with this, that we'll have each other's backs. What? Wow, I said. I'd known this day was coming, but my parents always talked about it like some far off future. I'd be an adult, and Ricky would be in college with our entire childhoods and adolescence behind us. Papi smiled and hugged me so tight, I pushed away the small part of me that was afraid. The wind picked up, drying my eyes until they burned and filled with tears. I let them fall on his shirt, so he would only see me smile when I finally pulled away. I'm really happy for you, I said. For us, he corrected me. Hijita, everything I do is for us. We went back to scanning the mangroves for alligators, and every once in a while we'd see one, its tail slithering by so quietly it barely disturbed the water. We counted 34 turtles and 67 white ibises, and even spotted 2 of their nests. The baby ibises had brownish feathers and sleepy-looking eyes, and Papi started naming each one after me, my brother, and my cousins. You're that one, he said, pointing at the biggest of the little ones, standing at the very edge. It had more patches of white than brown, and it looked the most like its parent, which was covered entirely in plumes the color of clouds. Esos otros, they look a little lost, he said, but I have faith that that one will find her way. Thank you.
Oh my gosh, I love that one. I love that passage. It's so great. Oh, well, there's so much to talk about.
Yes.
Part of the reason why I pitched this to the San Francisco Public Library was because I feel like our books make very strong commentaries on our political lives as Latinx communities. And I wanted to talk about that. I wanted to talk about the moment that we're in and all of that, but mostly because our books, I feel, although they're totally different, they really are speaking in some way.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you say?
I agree completely. I think that the political lives of our communities are so complex and rich, and it's something that is often easily not like when you talk about like these, quote unquote mainstream conversations that somehow don't end up involving us, unfortunately, then we get painted as this like monolith, right? In this group that all has the same experiences, same privileges, same voices, and even personal and political views when it comes to beliefs and stances. And I think that both of our books are such, they're such examples of the diversity that exists, even, not just amongst communities, but like sometimes in Nadia's case, even within like a family. How like there can be so much rooted in love and yet still be so many differences.
And
And not only that, but just how the political is deeply personal. And Bebita's family, and Bebita herself experiences that in such a heart-wrenching way. And Mani has so much more privilege in the sense that she's sometimes not even aware of it. But one thing she does end up witnessing is the way that that privilege can be used either for good or for oppression, which sadly Bebita is on the other side of that.
Yeah, she is. I think that her power, she comes to understand that her power is in the fight. And although before she didn't believe that she had that power. Can we talk about, like, when we started to write these books? Talk about like I remember we talked a little bit before this conversation about the timing, right? Like when I started to write this book in March of 2018. When did you start to write yours?
Okay, around July of 2016. Yeah.
So
okay.
When was that? Was that before or after Trump?
Well, so it was pre-election, but he had launched his campaign about a year before then. So definitely, so much of the rhetoric was already there. So much of the division and the hatred that he was using and espousing and continues to do so. I would love to talk to you about that, because I know that the word timely gets used a lot, to describe our work. And I'm just wondering, given that, like you said, we started these books 2 to 4 years ago, like, how do you see your work being in conversation with the current moment? And like, do you embrace that word, like timely? Do you not embrace it? Like, what are the implications that you feel it brings to your work?
Well, to me, because I wrote it in 2018, in March of 2018, I wrote it during a time when the Trump administration was retaliating very strongly against sanctuary states and sanctuary cities. And because I live in Northern California, we live in the Bay Area here, there were a lot of raids, and there was one kind of major raid that happened where ICE alerted the mayor alerted the community, and people were in terror. And of course, across the state, there were more, measures of retaliation. People were getting picked up, while they were taking their kids to school, or like this one couple, they were on their way to work. They were farm workers, and they were chased by ICE, and they got in a car accident, and they both died in that accident, leaving behind 6 orphan children, orphans, all US citizens. And so those were the kinds of stories that were kind of really alive in my mind and in my heart when I wrote this story. And that's where it comes from. And then also because I was undocumented as a child, it kind of really informed it. I had no idea that in June of 2018 that the Trump administration was going to start separating children at the border. But actually, we're discovering that it started in 2017, I knew that the Obama administration had started these prisons. It was the Obama administration who created these conditions and deported so many of us that we called him the deporter in chief, right? So we knew that our communities were already under attack, and so that was kind of like the foundation. But I had no idea that it would continue to be in conversation, like an ongoing conversation with the increase of really like human rights abuses against the migrant and immigrant community in the United States. So I don't get, I don't know if timely is necessarily the right word, but I think that because there's such a long history that against attacks, but I don't know. I don't think that it's correct, but at the same time it is, because these things continue to happen. To, you know, just yesterday we found out that there was 545 children who have still not been reunited with their parents.
Yeah.
And it continues. How about you? Like, do you appreciate that word timely in relation to your work?
I mean, I tend to push back against it sometimes. It was used a lot for my last book, because my last book dealt with immigration, and one of the characters, he's a teenager who crosses the border on his own, and I just my worry with that word is that it implies that these things are new, that they're somehow novel, when really, when you look at the history of our immigration system, even from its very, very beginnings, even from a policy standpoint, the very first immigration law that our country had was a racist one, and it was the Chinese Exclusion Act. So it's always been embedded in our system, and so those of us whose lives have been affected by it, it's not new or suddenly relevant. You know, I often would tell people, you know, I came here when I was 4, so my whole life, this topic of immigration, this issue that we talk about, has just been my life experience, and the uncertainty that comes with that, the feeling of knowing that the power there's an outside force and power that can really determine the outcome of your entire life, of where you are in the world physically. That's something that's never suddenly relevant to me, right? And to so many of us. And even with running, I was writing it, like I said, in 2016, and it, you know, I see it as a book that's, I mean, yes, it takes place during an election and it deals with an election, but I also see it as one bigger than that it's really more about what do we do with our power, and how do we hold those who have it to account when they're abusing it. And in a way, I actually, you know, Trump is mentioned once in this book, very, very briefly. And that was really purposely done because I think that, you know, as Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has famously said, this is the ills of our society are not born solely of one administration or one president. And so they've always been there. And so this book could exist whether or not he were president today. The party policies would exist, you know. And so when I was, you know, Mani ends up finding herself at the center of a movement because she learns that one of the policies that her father helped put into place is actually, its after effects, it's that it's causing a public health crisis. And yet here we are in the middle of a public health crisis and a pandemic. And so the idea of timely is strange to me when people say that, because these things aren't coincidental. I think these are just a result of, like, we are living in the world, we're paying attention to it, we see all the things that have always been happening, and of course our art will reflect that. Not only seeing it, but often experiencing it. And that's sadly not something that just can turn on and off.
Not at all. I mentioned Trump 0 times in my book for the same reason. And originally I had dated the little girl's poems. She's a stickler about dating the poems, and we removed that because of the same reason, because these issues come up over and over again until we have, like, I think, a really radical abolition movement, and that is strong. And you know, it's going to keep happening. And our total reform of our immigration policies, for me anyway, I think they're going to keep happening. And even still, you know, somebody early on when I first sold this book, somebody said, well, oh, that's kind of like Anne Frank, right? And you seem to believe that Anne Frank was just so long ago, right? The Diary of Anne Frank was so long ago, but it wasn't that long ago. It's such recent history, and it's studied, but we have not really focused on the same level of inhumanity that's taken place on the United States in literature, in children's literature. Um, can we talk a little bit about what divides us as a country, and maybe even take it a little step further about what divides us as a Latinx community?
Gosh, that's a really good question.
Well, I'd say that let me say that the reason why I wanted to ask this question, or for us to talk about it, was because in your book there's a character named Didier who is Haitian. And he says this to Mari, the main character, about her father. You ever notice in your dad's speeches how he only says exiles when he's talking about your family, but immigrants when he's talking about refugees from Honduras or Haiti or Mexico? And to me, that it just illuminated the divide. But that's within the Latinx community, but I think we all have been feeling what's happening in the wider community.
Yeah, no, and for me, that scene was, it was important because I think one of the things that I wanted to explore within writing was just the different forms of privilege that exist within our communities, that they exist based on race, they exist based on sexuality, they exist based on gender, they also exist, and I don't think we talk about it enough, just based on immigration experiences, countries of origin, and they're all kind of wrapped in that. Like when Didier mentions how come Haitian immigrants don't have that same, they don't have, they're not talked about in the same breath with the same kinds of actual at a policy level privileges, although now left foot, dry foot is no longer a policy, but what he's referring to is the ways that Cuban immigrants and Haitian immigrants were treated despite having very similar experiences. And so there it's not just about the country you're coming from and having different immigration privileges, but also I feel it's colorism and it's anti-Blackness, and it's how that all these things manifest. And I think that we can trace so much of the divisions that we have within our community to that, and to sadly, who do you end up aligning yourself with when you're oppressed? Do you align yourself more with the oppressor in hopes that they will no longer continue to make you feel othered and to continue to take away your rights? Or do you fight the system, not just for yourself, but for others as well, who are also, suffering under those same rules, I guess. Not even rules, but I often think of, the reason that Mari's dad, I mentioned this in the book, he's a white Latinx Cuban-American man. And there's a reason why he's running for president, is that that's part of why he was able to reach this very high position. His privilege allowed him to and his willingness to play according to certain rules established by those already in power who had benefited from their own white male privilege. And his willingness to really just continue perpetuating that is part of why he is now in power. So yeah, I think that's often sometimes that's something we really need to examine within our own communities.
Yeah, I think about the level of vitriol, the level of hatred that has been kind of at the center of the most recent, of the last 4 years in particular, 5 years, because it happened before the election. But how, I asked my husband the other day, I was like, why is it that we go to war? Not just during this time, but kind of throughout history, if we look back even in ancient history, we understand that people warred. And what is it about humanity that categorizes, that stratifies, that separates, and places value on some human lives more than others. That to me is just such a huge flaw in humanity in general, and I don't think that it's necessarily just of this moment. But I think what the Trump administration did, if it did anything well, it was to use that I don't know, is it primordial? I don't know. That tendency of ours to separate, to other, to oppress. And it baffles me. I'm not sure how, but I do believe that we are in a state of kind of coming into consciousness as a larger group, and that there are these movements towards justice that really kind of try and push back against that, what we believe is the only way that we can gain power, that there isn't another idea of bringing us all up in the same way, because we're human. And then in terms of like the Latinx community, it's painful to me. I feel pained when I see like Latinos for Trump. Oh my God, I get really, really conflicted. It's painful to have people who are in my own family who are Latinos for Trump. That it feels like a betrayal. It feels like a betrayal. And even though I understand that it's in our humanity to divide and conquer and exploit and war, it just feels like because we have common experiences, like I'm talking about my family, in my family, that we're immigrants, we're brown, we were poor as children, like all of these things, like doesn't that mean something? I want to like say, doesn't it mean something? Don't you remember? But I really feel like it's what you said, it's this proximity to what is safe, and that draws them, and to comfort, and to the attaining a privilege that they didn't experience.
It's also so further exacerbated by the exploitation of each community's fears. We have very specific traumas depending on which country we came from.
Yeah.
And sadly, I think that they've been exploited to the point that like fear is such a powerful motivator, sadly. Like, when you actually, like I've been studying this for just for in terms of character development, because I think like what are the things that motivate people to do what they do? When you look at it even at a psychological level, fear is one of the strongest motivators. And I think that, and it's not just Trump, I think that the entire party for decades has known this. And I think it hurts me to see the fears of Latinx communities and the very diverse fears of that being like used as buttons, that and being used often with like misinformation and lies. And so it just becomes part of this story, like these stories that we tell each other and ourselves, and that only just lead to that division even more.
Do you think that there's a place for justice in politics and in life? I mean, I think that as an ideal, but do you think?
I think I'd love to actually, this reminds me so much of just how what you depict in Land of the Cranes, and just the ways that your characters and Bebita specifically finds a way to harness power, even in moments when you would think a person is most powerless. And I think this is something that you do so beautifully, is that you refuse to be that person who only sees her and those like her as powerless victims, or like voiceless or faceless or anything. And actually, if anything, the thing that most leads to even a semblance of change or a step towards justice for her is her and those who are with her to use what they have, which is their voices, their poetry, their stories, and I think that when we talk about like, can there be justice in politics, I think a lot of the ways that we talk to our youth about like assuming that they're too idealistic, that, oh, this is just the way politics are. People are corrupt and people lie. And it's almost like we've given up the fight before we even started it. So I just, what do you think? Like, because especially also in terms of the role that Kidlit can play in this and shaping that conversation.
Mm-hmm. I am so weary of our political system. I'm a leftist. I a progressive, and I feel like I've lost faith in having a kind of a clean election and all of it, just because things are so corrupt, But at this point, I feel like we have no choice but to try and practice, go through the exercise of voting in order to try and attain some kind of process, to regain some semblance of a democratic process. I feel like there's so much that needs to be done. Like if we had like a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, like in South Africa, that really focused on repairing harms that communities have suffered, not just pointing to them, but really like their whole job is to seek justice. Then I would kind of be like, yes. So maybe that's what I want, and that maybe that's the hope, right? That I have, that if this new administration comes in, I'm going to say when this new administration comes in, that they have that there's some sort of body like that can do it. And in terms of Kidlit, how of course, like for me, writing is my resistance. It's the way that I communicate and fight back. And certainly, as you mentioned in the book, Rudine Bishop Simmons' famous Windows and Mirrors essay, where she said that books can be mirrors for children who haven't seen themselves or in the books, or they can be windows, so that they can see into other worlds. I think that that's really brilliant, but because of who I am and because of my activist background, I feel like my books have to be a little more than that, more than a window, more than a mirror. They have to be agents of change, and I need to be able to say to children, no, you know what? Yes, it's a window. Yes, it's a mirror, but it's also a roadmap. And this book is like, if Petita in her darkest hour can do this, then you can too, right? And you have the power, even if you are a small child, to do something really significant about it. And to me, that's where the hope lies for Kidlit. I don't know, but what about you?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's interesting that you mentioned truth and reconciliation committees within the same breath as you mentioned storytelling, because I think that that's something that exists on the same plane. I was born in Peru, and I remember the first time I really learned about what was happening at the time that my family left in the 80s. It was because I had gone back to Peru, and I was my uncle took me out, like just on the, he took me out a pasear and whatever. He took me to a museum, and it was the Truth and Reconciliation Museum. And it was stories that my parents had never told me, because there are stories that are too painful sometimes to tell. And it was the first time I had seen what had happened in the 80s, not just because of the terrorist groups that existed, but also the acts of the government that massacred and disappeared its own people in trying to win this war against terrorism. And so it's just we need truth seeking to go forward. We can't go forward without the truth. And I think that's why, for example, we saw that a couple weeks ago suddenly this administration is trying to law like diversity inclusion efforts, and any sort of conversation that even begins to tackle the history of white supremacy in this country and the ways that it's still alive today in a systemic way. And so I think that our storytelling, like I agree with you, I feel like to me, I see running as like a call to action, a call to question, to not just assume that power is powerful and then that's where it will stay, and to assume that that because there are those in power, that means you're powerless. And it was important to me that, like, Maddie's 15, she can't vote. So a lot of times people like to talk about my book within the same breath as an election, and they'll say the call to action is to vote. And I'm not saying not to vote. I think, like, if you have the privilege to vote, like, please use it. It's the least that we can do for each other. My family was affected for so much of my life by policies they could have never voted on until I was like 18, so it's not lost on me that there are many people who can't vote. And so if we have that privilege, we need to be using it, but we also need to be using all of our privileges and all of our power. And so Maddie, who's 15, like, she meets friends who are activists and who are like helping her in this journey to realize what's important to her and what she can do to change the things around her. And I related a lot to Maricel in your book.
Right, the dreamer. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I love, the first time Vivita sees her, like, she sees her in a moment when she's feeling nothing but pure rage. And I thought that was so important. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like, what?
Sure.
Please tell me, I want to talk about it.
That there is a moment when Maricel comes in, she gets beaten by the guards because she's just she can't believe it. She is a dreamer protected by DACA, but she's at a protest. She makes a statement against the unfair treatment of ICE against the immigrant community, and when she's in, she's just like so upset. She's like pure fire. She's spitting left and right, like talking about how it's that they are the colonizers, that they came here and stole land, that people of the Americas should be free to migrate across the Americas, that they're the ones who are committing human rights abuses. And Betita's like, first she's really scared of her, but then she really comes to understand that's a fire that she wants to learn from. And it's through that character, through Maricel, that Betita kind of is encouraged to rise up in her own way. And so, yeah, I think that there have been people like that in my life who have inspired me, and I wanted to have that in the book.
Yeah, I agree. It was really powerful. And I agree. I had people like that in my life too. And I can remember those moments.
But in your book too, in Jackie, that character I think is similar, right?
Yeah. Jackie is someone who, she's a student activist in Maddie's school, who at the very beginning of the book, Maddie is also kind of scared of her because, all she's heard about her is all the trouble that she's caused through her protests and demonstrations. And her father, Maddie's father, kind of tells her, like, "Ay, es una malcriada," like, you need to stay away from her. And because Maddie in the beginning of the book doesn't challenge her dad as much, again, she's at first really nervous around Jackie, and only when she gets to know her and they become friends, does she really just start to realize Jackie is someone who has very strong beliefs and turns them into action. And she's someone who in turn ends up inspiring Maddie to do the same and to really kind of question when the things that the people in her life, the things that they tell her don't add up with the reality.
Mm-hmm.
And to really wonder, like, who is that serving? Like, who does that actually help?
Mm-hmm.
Even though they say it helps the people, why is it that the policies that he's put in place, for example, have mostly helped developers in her community, have caused people that she loves to be pushed out of their homes, and then so she's just learning so much as she goes. And I think that's something that is really important. To me, it was important to capture is that, like, none of us are perfect in our journeys towards activism, but we often learn as we go, and there are so many people we can learn from. And if we can come to a place of understanding that we're students, that we can be humble in that, then I think there's something really powerful in that.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can we talk about like the dads, and I also want to talk about hashtags in our books, like it's so there's such different books, but we talk about there's these particular connections, like the kind of mentor raging activist and the main character, and then the relationship, the very strong relationships between father and daughter, and then hashtags. So maybe you could speak a little bit about the relationship in the father-daughter relationship in your book.
Yeah, like Maddie loves her dad deeply, and she has always supported him, and she really sees him as her hero. And I think there's up until even really deep, like up until quite a large part of the moment, she really thinks that he'll be the one who ends up saving the day. She has to kind of realize eventually that maybe it's up to her, and to her and her friends, her own, stepping into her own power. But I think one of the things that that was really important to me was that she's still pulling strength from the things he taught her. She is actually still her father's daughter. She is actually still, he always wanted her to become this strong, independent person. He just thought that would look a different way. And so when she ends up becoming someone else, he takes it personally, and it hurts him, and it hurts her too, because it's so full of conflict. But there's moments, even till the very end, that like the things that, yes, Jackie inspires her. Yes, there's people in her life who help push her through, but like at these core moments, it's the lessons he taught her that she remembers. She just uses them in different ways than he ever imagined.
Can you remind me of that line, the poder line? No, the three things. What is it?
Oh, yeah, he tells her to create change, you need three things: people, purpose, and ganas.
Exactly. But she's using it as she's activating. I mean, she's literally beginning to politicize and go out there. Well, like the same with my girl and her dad. Her dad told her, encuentra la dulzura en tu lucha, find the sweetness in your struggle. And she carried that, and really was the guiding light for her to survive in the detention center. She kept trying to figure out how to do it. And I think children inherently have that, right? I had a child who was who had open heart surgery, and we went to the hospital, and in the hospital, we spent days there, and I would get in the elevator with many sick children and their parents. And one thing in common that every single child that I encountered in the hospital was that they played. That the glimmer of hope and playfulness remained. Like they could have been like super, super sick, but they were still playing with a little bit of hair, or you smiled at them, they smiled back, and I think that children inherently carry that, and we lose it as we get older, of course, but that sweetness exists. And so I think that was what I was trying to communicate in the book, and I was hoping that and that had everything to do with her father and that longing and for that dad. Yeah.
You did it so beautifully. I mean, the sweetness and the struggle, and just the ways that Bebita does not only find it, but she also plays, and she, like, even the hardest moments that in the book, because they're so seen through her eyes, and she has so much dulzura in her, that it's not like, it's still there. And I think it's such a beautiful testament to how, like, you're writing not about characters, like, these are human beings, and you treat them and respect them and honor them as such. And I think that's really the power of literature that, like, is being written through own voices, that is not being not just using the pain of a community for storytelling's sake.
Right.
That you see it as like
happened with some unnamed author earlier in the year.
But actually, before let's talk about the hashtags though.
Yeah, Yes, let's not talk about that. Let's talk about the hashtags. Okay, it was so awesome to be reading through your book and seeing so many hashtags. They were like, because and in the same in mine, right? Like I think there's a poem in mine. It's called hashtag revolution, just because because it's a tool.
Yeah.
It's a tool for especially for the youth. Wouldn't you say that it's a tool for the youth in particular?
Oh, absolutely. And I think it's it's almost poetic in the way that like the actual mechanics of a hashtag are to unite and, like to unite threads of conversation together. And that's really what they do in the stories and in our lives. Like that's how they operate. It's a way of saying you can't divide our voices, because here they all exist right here in unity, even if we're not occupying the same spaces. And yeah.
But then I think also what comes with that is the power of social media, which has been so devastating for so many, like my family. I'm constantly fighting with my kids about how much social media they're like attached to the phones like zombies. But I think about the power of it at the same time, and that's why I allow them to have phones, because I think that there's so much to be mobilized, so much to be galvanized to uplift people and to unite people.
Yeah.
Yeah. What was your favorite hashtag in your book? Do you remember?
I think hashtag dump Irving.
Dump Irving. Oh yeah, that was the bad guy, the bad developer. No, you know which one was mine? I think Poder. What is it? Poder is.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Oh my God. People against oppression, resisting. Oh my God. Why? How am I forgetting? Hold on. I was literally just telling Aida earlier. I was like, isn't it funny how we forget details about our books?
Yes. Well, no, it was Poder for Change.
Oh, right. Yes. Poder for Change. Yes.
Change.
Okay.
Yeah. That was my favorite in your book. And then in mine, the favorite hashtag was oh my gosh, is it time for I'm just looking at the time. Is it time for questions?
We'll probably do have to do questions.
Okay, well, I'll just finish. Mine is Free the Cranes.
I love that one, and it broke my heart when Maddie said it. Was like kind of just was like, no, we're not going to use that one.
no, we're not going to use that. Nobody knows what that is.
And then also when Revita tells her like, my cousin has 1,000 followers, and she's like, yeah, okay. It's so cute. That was a really, really sweet moment. It made me laugh.
I didn't want to stop you guys from talking.
Okay.
It's been amazing just to hear kind of you both just dissect things and just go in on your titles and what's happening right now and what's been happening for a while. So I didn't want to jump in and get in there, but we do have a couple of questions. So if you guys are okay with taking some questions. Just so first of all, the presence that you both have and your humility and your brilliance, thank you so much for bringing that to our screen. You know, we're unable to do this in person, but this is just amazing to be able to do that. First question that came in, a reader or a viewer would love to know if you have any good books on your radar that you've read recently for kids, YA, or adults. Of course, yours, and if there were any others.
Do you know if it's, were they looking about politics or about just in general?
I
think just in general. I think they're just like tuned into the brilliance.
Okay. Well, let's see. This is what I have here. This one is just excellent. If you want to, this is for the young adult audience, and that's by Jenny Torres Sanchez, and it got 5-star reviews. It's a masterpiece. It's really excellent. It's about these children who ride La Bestia to come to the United States. And then this one, Cia Martinez and the Moonlit Beginning of Everything. It's just a marvelous, magical book. I really recommend it. And Running. Do you know about this book, Running? That's just what I have right here. Oh, and I should say for adults, Unforgetting by Roberto Lobato, who was a guest on Viva as well. That book is like one of the first, I guess it's the first book by a Central American about migration and immigration. So it's incredible too.
Yeah, I finished recently reading Adriana Cuevas's The Total Eclipse of Nestor Lopez, which I loved. It's a middle grade book, and it's about a boy who learns he can talk to animals. He's moved around so much, and I related to that a lot, having moved around a lot. So, and he's Cuban-American, and it's really, I think I saw it as like a story about trying to find home, you know. I'm also really excited in the adult in the adult book world, I guess. Naima Coster's What's Mine and Yours, which is coming out in March. And she's just such a beautiful writer, and she explores like interpersonal relationships so deeply and honestly. And her next book is one that will explore the ways race plays out in these really intimate ways within friendships. So I'm really excited to read that.
All right. So everybody, you heard these picks here first, okay? If you didn't already know about them.
And then also go to Las Musas books, of course. And then
definitely in the chat, there's a link right there, and go to Las Musas books. That's where all these amazing books, you can find them. I just have to say that your conversation earlier was grounding but actionable, and I felt like there was legit despair happening, but also kind of hope, like in resistance. And this is something that I wrote down in my notes, was like both of your characters, Mari and Betita, their voices are so authentic. And a question came in, would love to ask the authors what kind of recon work you've done with young people to get voices that are so authentic to today. Some authors sound like the young people of when they were young. So and I have to say that too. I think Betita and Mari were both they were so true to their voice. And even when you both read from your books, I heard it there too. So just wondering what you guys have for that one.
Yeah, I think, it's funny because the first thing that came to me was Mari's voice, and that's really where the story was always centered for me, and it's where it took off because it's about her finding her voice, so it came through pretty loudly and clearly for me. And I don't know that I would say that I necessarily did reconnaissance. I think it's just a matter of being in the world and listening to people, and so much of what I think is at the heart of my book is about that we have to listen to the voices of our youth, and we need to, we can't continue to just write off their concerns. And, I've taught teens creative writing, I think that they're, and even if you just pay attention to the youth movements that are happening now and have happened throughout history, I just wanted to honor that and to do that in a way that it's less about I don't know, it wasn't so much I need to make sure to include any slang or whatever, because I didn't want to feel like it, the book was dated, because I thought of this, I do think there's a timelessness to this process of us stepping into our own political awareness and power. So that's really how I approached that. Mm-hmm. What about you, Aida?
For me, it's about craft. I get very bothered when I can read the author in a voice. It pulls me out of the story, because I read so much kid lit, and I can spot it a mile away. And clearly the person who asked the question can too. But yeah, I think that it really, you have to listen as an author. You have to, eavesdrop. I have children, and so I eavesdrop, and I pay attention to what they sound like. but in this case for me, Betita's voice also came to me in a very, Isabel Allende, one time I went to see her read, and she said, yes, I was writing and all of a sudden this person appeared and she was fully, present, and I was like sitting in the audience going, yeah, lady.
We hate those people, right? And then suddenly it happens and you're like, oh, I guess
exactly. That's exactly what happened. I was just like, oh man, this is happening. Like really, the first 30 pages of the story were written almost like they were changed very little. It just came out just as it was, and I knew what Betita wanted, how she spoke, that she liked chocolate milk, that her puppy was going to be taken away, all of that. And so jokes on me.
Oh, that's fantastic. Definitely seeing some appreciation and thanks in the chat. And a great question from someone: how can people buy signed books from each of you? So I'll let both of you address that question.
You can buy signed copies from Booklandia Box, which is a Bay Area local independent online bookseller who anytime you buy a book from them, I sign whatever book. I have 3 books over there: Spanish of the Moon Within, and in English, and then now this one.
And I included information for mine, which is a local bookseller here in Austin. So anytime an order comes through that, I can sign and personalize it.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful. So they're both in the chat. So feel free to grab that link there if you're interested. Please support your local bookstore, your local online bookstore, Booklandia. Please support the Friends of the Library. You can also purchase books there. And if you're local, if you're in San Francisco, we have both of our authors' books in our collection, so you can always reserve the books through the library right now. I just wanted to really briefly just offer some thanks too. I'm so glad you both spoke on the term timely and where you went with that. And if this is for kind of young people who may be out there reading and watching and thinking about the drafts that you go through when you write something. So I'm wondering if you both could speak a little bit about that, like how, you both said you started your books way before right now, right? Like way before when we started, when they were published, maybe not way before, but definitely before. Mm-hmm. And we know that book covers take time and drafts take time and there's revisions that happen. So wondering if you can speak a little bit about that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You want to go first? I'll let you go first.
Oh, sure. I'm very much a reviser. I don't think I've ever, I mean, yes, like Aida, like what you're saying about like the first 30 or so pages, like my first maybe 10 or something pages around there of running came out really pretty much the same as what they are in the book. But after that, I really just kind of like froze. And I tend to really process and kind of crystallize the story in revision. And I think of it as an opportunity to not only rewrite and revise parts of the story, but really even reimagine it. Like once you have a rough draft, what you have a sense of what the heart is of your story, but do you know if I see the revision as a chance to really make sure to bring it out in a way that is the truest version of it, its fullest potential. So I really love revising. And
do you write chronologically?
No, not always. Like the book I'm working on right now, I'm just writing random scenes. I try to write chronologically. Like I wrote running pretty chronologically, but yeah, with the next one, I'm just like I wrote a scene in like towards the end. It really just depends on where you're at on any certain day. It's my previous book. I wrote the last scene of the last chapter of the book halfway through because it ended up being like a guiding post to kind of get me through the middle, because the middles can be really hard for me. What about you?
No, I I wrote the first 30 pages, and then I stopped, and then I actually plotted it. I wrote a synopsis from beginning to end because I need to know what's happening, what's going to happen. So I just need like the Cliff Notes version of it first, and that's my guidepost posts. And so, and then as soon as I did that, that was like 2 days after I wrote the first 30 pages, then I just started writing. I went back in, and then like by the end of the week I had 50 pages, and then I just kept going. And I write chronologically because it just feels more organic, you know. It feels, to me anyway, it feels like somebody's actually telling me the story, and it's unfolding. Like, I don't tell me the ending. I always get mad when people tell me the ending, so I'm not telling myself the ending either. I mean, even though I have the Cliff Notes version, but like, and so by the time I finish, I don't have like, I have a pretty strong first draft, and I only revised that for the last 2 books. I've only revised like maybe 3 or 4 times, like back and forth with my editor, but I do love it, because when the editors say, oh, you know what, there's a big hole there, and I'm like, yeah, okay, well, we can just fill that in, it's fine, because everything's there.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Fascinating. I have one more question, but I'm wondering if you both have anything else you'd like to converse about before my final question. Wasn't sure if I kind of interrupted anything.
Well, I know. What do you think, Aida? I feel like we covered it. No?
Yeah, I think so. It's good.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer questions.
Okay, it was. I just have to tell you, I cannot wait to rewatch this, because it's going to be so. I'm just amazed that I'm sitting here, here in part of this, just as just taking it in. So my final question is, what does the word viva mean to you?
Oh.
I think of legacy. I think, what do we do with our lives that will outlive us? And and what does it mean to know that as we go through the world?
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. For me, it's more like call to action. Que viva, chingo, like, let's do this, like, this is like, que viva la causa, que viva, que viva, que viva. To me, it's like them fighting words. So like, I feel like, and it's celebration, fight, struggle, and resistance. So yeah, I love it. I love viva, porque estoy viva.
I'm just again amazed. It just means life for me, que viva la vida, right? Like, just life is there, and you both bring that with your presence and your titles and your conversation, and just to have you both here. I'm just going to keep saying that. So I just thank you so much for saying yes to this, and for just leading the way for us.
Oh, it's such a pleasure. It's such a pleasure. I'm such a fan of the San Francisco Public Library and a fan of Natalia. So it's a dream come true to be in conversation with her.
Thank you. No, I feel the same. I'm just such an admirer, not only of her work, but your advocacy, and it's inspiring. When I talk about the things and the people who inspire us, you're absolutely like within that, like one of those people. And so I'm just like, it means a lot to be in conversation with you, and Liliana too, and Marisela, and like everyone at the library. Like, thank you so much for making this happen.
Definitely. Well, thank you both. That's all we have. We went a little over, but thank you all for tuning in. Please check out the chat for how you can purchase their books, and visit lasmusasbooks.com for more information about other just powerful books and authors. And that's all we have. Have a great evening. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.